God bless everybody today. It is June 20th of 2021, and today we're going to go over a number of different prophecies. One I've not covered before called Enoch's prophecy of the 70 shepherds. I'll also be looking at the paradigm that I found about the three modern day kings. Actually, it includes a fourth king, but he's not named, so in that instance, I call it the three modern day kings because the kings of the past that major prophets have talked about are giving us insight to what is happening in the past will happen in the future, and I believe past does reoccur in the future because God forewarns us of things that are coming upon us, the Gentiles and the Jews. So to explain the prophecy, I'm using this resource, and I always try to give the resources that I'm using. That way you can follow what I'm talking about, where I find the information, and I want people to understand one thing. You know, as a student of God and as a teacher, hopefully I'm teaching you properly and not trying to interpret this wrong, because there is a cost for a teacher teaching God's Word improperly. I'm giving you information so that you can understand what God's trying to tell us, but I don't want to mislead you. I don't want to give you information that's wrong. So I always try my best to show you the verses, where I find the information, how the verses link together, how all these connections matter to us today. And so I don't ever want you to look at what I'm doing and not go out and do some research yourself and try to determine whether these things I'm saying are actually true or not. I'm still trying to figure this out. Anyone that says that they have all this figured out is lying. We're all in the process of trying to figure out God's message to us, as I believe we work into the last 6.5 years here before the Lord comes back on the seventh trumpet. So let's look at Enoch's vision, what he saw, how that might affect us. And I'm using this resource because I think it gives a good layout of the actual prophecy. Now, I don't know if the United States is actually included in the prophecy, other than we really don't help Israel at the end, and we're a Gentile nation. And so, when the Jews sort of removed Jesus from the equation and the church was taken to the Gentile side through Saul, which became Paul, and then we had Peter dealing with the Jewish side of the church and Paul dealing with the Gentile of the church. The Jews sort of were removed from the equation in the sense that they don't believe in Jesus being the Messiah or the Son of God, and that he was a man or a prophet, and that because of this was ordained and given to the Gentiles to move the word forward, because we do believe in the Son of God, Jesus the Son, and we did bring him forward after he was crucified. And so a lot of the dates and stamps and things that I use are on the Gregorian calendar. Now you have to look at the Hebrew Jewish calendars also, and so there's a lot going on here, and we're trying to break this down into some rationale of sense so that you can see what these prophets were talking about. Now, in Enoch's prophecy of the 70 shepherds, and like I say, I don't know how, in this article they indicate this is about the United States and Israel and prophecy, and I don't see that there is much indication that the United States is really stated anywhere in the Bible itself. We try to equate the United States to certain things, but I think most of this has to do with the Middle East. But I do believe this article does give a good overview of the 70 shepherds of Israel and how that is going to lead me into a number of stages into this video on how I believe this breaks down differently than what has been taught, and how this actually culminates to the end, where I have shown you this paradigm of the three modern day kings, which are Erdogan of Turkey, Isaac Herzog, which is the new president of Israel, and the older president of Israel, which is Reuven Rivlin. And I believe these three kings, or modern day leaders, will be a major factor in what is to come in the next 6.5 years. So let's dive into this. Let's sort of explain the prophecy, and then we'll break it down so that we can see how this might affect us as we move forward. So I'm sort of going to read some of this through so you can understand what the prophecy is about and what it means, and then I'm going to break it down into what I personally interpret it, my opinion, based on Scripture and what I've been showing you based on my teachings. Now, understand my teachings aren't related to anyone else's teachings because they're my teachings. I don't follow any church or any group of people or anything in general, as you can tell. I'm much more radical than a lot of these teachers out here in my understandings. But I think it's important that we understand it and have a different view of what's going on out here other than what the churches are giving us, because I believe the church has been misleading us for a long, long time. So I'm going to sort of read what this article's talking about, and this leads us into the 70 shepherd prophecy of Enoch and how that's going to affect us. So he indicates there's another prophecy that, although it does not give an exact year date, indicates that we are in the threshold of the tribulation period. This prophecy also speaks of a fiery abyss that the wicked will be cast into. The prophecy isn't in the Bible, however, it is instead found in the book of 1 Enoch, in Enoch's prophecy of the 70 shepherds of Israel. Based on archaeological evidence, even the most conservative scholars agree that the manuscript this prophecy appears in predates the New Testament by at least several hundred years. However, the book of 1 Enoch and the prophecy of the 70 shepherds may predate most of the Old Testament by 1,000 years or more. And the reason this is because Enoch actually wrote this prophecy almost 700 years before the flood of Noah. So this is an extremely old prophecy. It needs to be looked at extremely careful, because we need to be able to look at this thing and determine whether it's really affecting us today as we move forward here. And so, if this happened 1,000 years prior to even the Old Testament being produced, then Enoch speaks of the shepherd or rulers who govern over Israel not just in the past, but also in the future. And so in this vision, Enoch saw that there would be 70 shepherds of Israel. And he called 70 shepherds, and cast those sheep into them, that they might pasture them. And he spoke to the shepherds and their companions, Let each individual of you pasture the sheep henceforward, and everything that I shall command you, you shall do. And I will deliver them over unto you duly numbered. And I tell you which of them are to be destroyed, and them destroy ye. And he gave over unto them those sheep. These 70 symbolic shepherds watch over the flock of the sheep that figuratively are God's chosen people, or the Jews. And that the next passage tells us that Enoch saw the first group of 35 shepherds as unique from the other shepherds to come. He said this, And I saw till that in this manner 35 shepherds undertook the pasturing of the sheep, and they severely completed their periods as did the first, and others received them into their hands to pasture them for their period, each shepherd in its own period, or its own season. That these first 35 shepherds correspond with the 35 kings of Israel and Judah that ruled before the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. And this is important. Nebuchadnezzar is a major player in my paradigm, which I believe is from past to future. King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king of the past, will actually be Erdogan of Turkey in the future. He is, and I've been saying this for a while now, the white horseman that's going to bring on the destruction of Israel with the 10 nations of Muslims that will come against them at the end. And that he will, this King Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the kingdom of Judah in 597 BC. After this, a series of foreign kings ruled over the promised land as shepherds. The following passage clarifies this time in history. The 70 shepherds Enoch saw were all descendants of Israel. Through some of these Israelite shepherds had overlords over them, who are also called shepherds. He says, The eyes of those sheep were blinded, so that they saw not, and the eyes of their shepherds likewise. And they, the shepherds of the sheep, delivered them in large numbers to their shepherds, the overlords of the shepherds, for destruction. And they trampled the sheep with their feet and devoured them. Enoch sees 23 foreign kings ruling over Israel until the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So you had 35 prior kings that now move into 23 additional kings, which are foreign type kings. And because of this, then gives you a total of 58 kings. Okay? So Enoch sees that 23 foreign kings ruling over Israel until the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, adding their number to 35 kings who came before. The total was 58 kings were foreseen as rulers over ancient Israel. Then Enoch says, And I saw unto that 23 had undertaken the pasturing and completed in several periods 58 times, talking about the 58 prior kings. Now they're talking about 70 kings altogether, so there's going to be 12 future kings as we move forward here. And so you're going to see that he starts talking about the 35 kings, or 35 shepherds that were prior to 597 BC. Then after that, they have 23 foreign kings that basically rule over the Jews, that are of the Jews themselves. They're kings that rule over them, the Persians, Babylonians, all these different kings that ruled over them, the Romans, different things like that. And so as we move into the destruction of that second temple in 70 AD, then there's that gap between the 70th week of Jacob. And so he keeps moving forward here, and he says, during the reign of the 23 puppet shepherds, Enoch describes the destruction among the lost sheep of Israel, as well as the building and destruction of the first and second temple in Jerusalem. Enoch also foresaw that, blinded by their ignorance of God's will, many of the 12 tribes of Israel would be scattered abroad and would become victims of many enemies during the times of the 2 temples. Enoch also foresaw the coming of a one-horned ram or unicorn, the goat with a long horn, who would open the eyes of the blind sheep and lead them to salvation. Now I say that because they're the ones that are going to be the catalyst that's going to bring all this pain onto the Jews, which is going to bring them to the conclusion someday, the admittance that Jesus is the Son of God and that they have to accept him to get to heaven. Enoch's vision disclosed that there would be a period of time when the followers of the one-horned ram will be persecuted and killed without mercy. The enemies of the one-horned ram will attempt to destroy the ram's teaching and followers, but will not succeed. We will discuss the spiritual and temporal meanings of the unicorn and what Enoch's unicorn means to Christians in the next chapter. And so, I'm not going to get into that. This is in his teaching. I'm just trying to go over this study about the 70 shepherds, and I don't want to get too deep into some of this. After this, Enoch says, he foresaw that 12 more shepherds would arise to govern over Israel. He therefore foretold the rebirth of Israel as a nation in modern day times, which was May 14th of 1948. But sadly, Enoch tells us that this group of 12 final shepherds in Israel will do more damage to Israel spiritually than the 58 bad shepherds who'd governed the country long before them. And so, since the conception of the nation of Israel, all leaders have fallen away from God's laws. They had the ability to bring the Jews back to God's laws, to the understanding that Jesus is the Son of God, and that they need to understand that that is the only way to heaven, and to follow the Torah and the laws that God has placed upon the Jews, but they have not done that. They have used man's interpretations and their understandings and nothing of God's teachings in general within this modern day society. They've just fallen away from God, and so God is going to bring destruction upon these people. And he tells us that 2/3 of them are going to perish in this destruction upon them. Joel 1 talks about the plagues, and Joel 2 talks about the sword of God coming against them. You also can look at Ezekiel 5:12, where 1/3 of the Jews perished by plagues and famine, and then 1/3 die by sword, and then 1/3 are taken away to the hidden place in Edom prior to the 1260 days of the trampling of the Gentiles on God's temple. So we need to connect all these things together. So in the modern day era, Enoch foresaw that 12 more shepherds would arise and govern over Israel. And so if you look at the nation of Israel conceived in May 14th of 1948, you have to look at the rulers that have been in place at that time. I will explain why I differ a little bit in this as we go down the page here. Most of the teachings have taught that these are prime ministers, okay, that they would be the 12 prime ministers of Israel. And that now, because Benjamin Netanyahu has been voted out, there's a 13th prime minister, that this somehow this prophecy is debunked or doesn't, Enoch was wrong. I disagree with this concept because it is not 12 prime ministers over the since 1948 that have ruled over Israel. It has been 12 presidents, and I'm going to go over why that matters and why I still believe that this prophecy is in play and that Enoch was right, and that we will see 12 presidents, and at the end of the season of the last president, or the 12th president of Israel, we have the 11th one now in Isaac Herzog, that we would see something happen to Isaac Herzog, which I explain in my paradigm of the 3 modern day kings, and how this would affect the Israelites, and they would then receive a 12th king or president through selection of, actually, Antichrist selects this governor to rule over this area, and that governor would die. And I show you where this happens as we move forward, and that this governor would die, and this would be the end of the 12th king, and that from that, shortly after that, our Lord Jesus would come back. And so I wanted to show you that there is a major difference in what I believe and what everyone else seems to be teaching in the 70 shepherd prophecy of Enoch, is that it is the 12 prime ministers, and I do not believe that is the case. I believe it's the 12 presidents. But we'll get into that in just a second. So Enoch foresaw that 12 more shepherds would arise to govern over Israel in the time of the nation of Israel, which was formed in May 14th of 1948. And he says this, "And I saw that man who wrote the book according to the command of the Lord, till he opened that book concerning the destruction which those 12 last shepherds had wrought, and showed that they had destroyed much more than their predecessors." So these 12 kings are going to do much more damage than the 58 prior kings. And you think about that, all the things that happened to the Jews in the past, hundreds, if not thousands of years that they've been on the ground. In the last 73 years, from the time the nation of Israel was conceived in 1948, May 14th, to now, as we move forward in this next 6.5 years, they will do more destruction than all 58 prior leaders or shepherds or kings. That is saying a lot. And that he indicates that I saw till the Lord of the sheep came unto them, and took in his hand the staff of wrath, and the smote of the earth, and the earth clave asunder, and all the beasts and all the birds of heaven fell among those sheep, and were swallowed up in the earth, and it covered them. And then Enoch says, "And I saw till a throne was erected in the pleasant land, Jerusalem, and the Lord of the sheep sat himself thereon, and the other took the sealed books, and opened those books before the Lord of the sheep. And the Lord called those men the 7 first white ones, and commanded that they should bring before him, beginning with the first star which led the way, all the stars whose privy members were like those of horses, and they brought them all before him. And he said to that man who wrote before him, being one of the 7 white ones, and said unto him, Take those 70 shepherds to whom I deliver the sheep, and who, taking them into their own authority, slew more than I had commanded them. So they've killed more people, they've caused more destruction than God has told them that they can do. So God is taking an account of what he has told them that they can do and what they have done on their own. And so God is literally taking track of this in a book. He writes this stuff down through an angel. The book is presented to God. God seals this book until the end, and then has the punishments or judgments at the end. And the judgment was held first over the stars, and they were judged and found guilty, and went to the place of condemnation, which is a lake of fire. And they were cast into an abyss full of fire and flaming, and full of pillars of fire. And those 70 shepherds, all 70 leaders of Israel, from past to future, were judged and found guilty. And they were all thrown into the lake of fire, or the fiery abyss. And I saw at that time how a like abyss was opened in the midst of the earth, full of fire, and they brought those blinded sheep, and they were all judged and found guilty, and cast into the fiery abyss, and they were burned. So the last 12 shepherds will be judged and found guilty, along with the 58 shepherd kings of Israel that came before them, and they will perish in the lake of fire. All of them, because they've all have not done what God has asked them. You know, all these leaders had the ability, and we're looking at the prime ministers, which I'm going to show you the differences between the prime ministers and the presidents here in just a second. But all these leaders had the ability to bring these Jews back, God's chosen people, back to his laws, to the Torah, to the understanding that Jesus is the Son of God. And they didn't do that. And so this torch, this cup of trembling, has been passed back to the Gentiles. And so we have to look at that, because it clearly tells us that the Gentiles are going to trample the holy city for 1260 days, as the Jews have been under severe judgment through plague, sword, and a third have been removed and taken to the hidden place. So why do I believe that the 12 prime ministers is a wrong interpretation to Enoch's prophecy? Number one, the 12 prime ministers are not the leaders of Israel. They are called presidents. And, you know, before I found the paradigm of the 3 modern day kings, which deal with Reuben Rivlin, Isaac Herzog, and Erdogan of Turkey, I didn't even know there was a president of Israel. You know, he just, Rivlin is such a quiet man. They don't really talk about him. Netanyahu's out in the front, and so I believe a lot of people think Netanyahu is the leader. But he's not. Netanyahu is like the Speaker of the House in the United States. He's not the leader. He is the voice, maybe, of the policies of that leader, and has a lot to do with the governmental side of the policies of that government. But Netanyahu is not the leader. He was not elected as the president. And at one time, I had indicated in the 3 modern-day king prophecy that maybe, possibly, Netanyahu might be the 3rd king that works in that paradigm. But he was elected out, and I had indicated in the original paradigm video that I did that it did not matter whether it was Netanyahu, that it had to be a first-term king or leader, but a new king. Reuben Rivlin's been there for 7 years now. He's been removed, but he's still a president of Israel, and so as we move forward, we're going to start to see how that affects Israel in that modern-day paradigm that I have presented. But this new king, or new leader, Isaac Herzog, his first year is this year, and of 2021, and as we move forward, we're going to see how that affects us also. So, as far as I can tell, all the teachings that I found about the 70 shepherds of Enoch's prophecy indicate, at least in modern day teaching, that it is the prime ministers of Israel that are the 12 we need to be watching. I disagree with this because they're not the leaders. So everybody's saying now, since Benjamin Netanyahu is not the leader of, or the prime minister of Israel anymore, and we have had a 13th one elected into office, that Enoch's prophecy is debunked and doesn't work. But I disagree with this because you have to look at the presidents. And so if we do look at the prime ministers, we'll realize that this is the current prime minister. Benjamin Netanyahu has been taken out of power. Naftali Bennett is the new prime minister. And you can see that if you go down through here, that we now have had 13 prime ministers. And so if you look at Enoch's prophecy in this light, in this optic of it being a prime minister, then yes, it would break Enoch's prophecy because now we have a 13th one. Now, the only way you could get around this is to say that this 12th Prime Minister Netanyahu has fulfilled his season, and so we have a new one, and so that season hasn't been fulfilled because, he's going to be the Prime Minister for, however long until the next election is. But in this case, it doesn't have to do with the Prime Minister, so I believe this doesn't matter. Okay? But if you go to the list of presidents of Israel, you'll notice something is extremely important here is happening. There has only been 11 of them. Okay? So if you go through the list from the conception of Israel in 1948, and they originally placed in the first president, we have had 11 sitting presidents. Now, with Isaac Herzog coming into office on July 9th of 2021, and his term will be 7 years, okay, as it states here. That's extremely important because I indicate in the parable of the fig tree that all things happen before the 80th year of the strong generation of the Jews, which would be May 14th of 2028. And so it would fit within that time period. But I indicate also in my paradigm of the three modern day kings that something would happen to this president, that he would be taken captive and be held captive for 3 years prior to him then coming back out later, finding a way to escape, get away from Antichrist. Somehow he is, freed, and then he rebels against Antichrist at the very end. And I show you this in this modern day paradigm of how this happens. If he is removed and taken out of power, and then a 12th king would be instated into the government, and I say this happens through Antichrist, and I will show you where I get this at, that we would have the 12th king, and that this king, this leader, this governor that Antichrist places into position dies. He's killed. One of the people in the court of the president finds these group of 60 people. Actually, there's 70 of them. They kill 60 of them, and then the last 10 barter their lives for food and land and different things like that. And I will show you how this all works. So we know that if we work off of the 70 shepherds, the last 12 would be the leaders of Israel from 1948, and that they would run all the way to the end. And you can see the chart and how this all occurs here. That we would see, now that we have Isaac Herzog here, we would see a 12th president before the end, and it indicates clearly in the prophecy of the 70 shepherds that once the 12th season is complete, the last shepherd is done, we would see then the Lord Jesus come back. And so it's an extremely important prophecy that if Isaac Herzog is elected in, and he got elected in, he'll take office July 9th of this year, something that would happen to him, and then we would see a 12th king that I believe Antichrist will actually put in place himself. And this would be a terrible king if this is the case, because, well, Antichrist put him in place. So I believe this is one of the main problems with our understanding of Enoch's prophecy of the list of the 12 last kings or shepherds, that people are using the prime ministers, which are not truly the leaders of Israel, and that they should be using the presidents of Israel. But most people don't understand that there potentially will be a tragic event occur to this man here, Isaac Herzog, based on my modern day paradigm of the three modern day kings, and that this man, based on multiple old day prophets, major prophets, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Daniel, it runs through multiple scriptures, this paradigm that I found. It has date stamps, all kinds of stuff. I'm going to try to explain all this stuff. But if you take these paradigms and you put them together with this, and I hadn't really known about this 70 shepherd prophecy. This was something that I've just recently looked into, but it's amazing that it fits right in with what I've been talking about and how it fits in with my timeline. I haven't changed a thing on my timeline. I did not realize that there was a 12 leader prophecy at the end that I had indicated in my modern day paradigm earlier, that we would see this, we would see a number of events occur. Not only will something happen to Reuben Revlin, something will happen to the newest president, Isaac Herzog, and that because of these two events, we would see, once the Antichrist is on the ground, that he would place in a governor to rule over these areas, and that he would be killed, which would make the 12th king or leader of Israel. He would die, and it indicates from the Enoch's 70th shepherd prophecy that right after that we would see the return of the Lord Jesus. And so I think this is extremely important, and maybe adds more validity, more importance, more profound evidence that the modern day paradigm of the three modern day kings that I found in this beautiful book called the Bible might truly be in play here. And so I want to go over this paradigm and how I believe it will affect us as we move forward in the next 6.5 years. So this is sort of the second part of the video. I know this is an extremely long video, and it goes over a lot of different things, but I think they're extremely important, and I believe that I have to put it all together in one video to make any real sense of what I'm trying to explain here. And so the paradigm of the three modern day kings, which I found, which run through multiple major prophets, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Daniel, a lot of scripture I'm going to go over here. So I'm going to try to go over it so you can follow. I'm going to show you the scriptures that I found it in, so there's no randomness here. All the things I'm showing you have scripture and verse attached. Okay, I'm not just speculating these things. I'm showing you these things because I found patterns that run through the Bible that indicate we should be looking at certain things for a reason, and that they indicate what possibly might be coming. And if so, it actually gives us a map, a calendar of events of things that are coming on actual specific dates. And I know everybody gets all hung up on the specific dates, but if God is telling us in multiple books and through multiple prophets the same exact thing, then I think we need to sort of dissect that stuff down and try to figure out what he's telling us. But the paradigm of the three modern day kings affects three major leaders that are alive today and that are sitting in place right now. We just had Reuben Revlin, which I believe is Zedekiah in the book or in the Bible. From past to future, he would be Zedekiah in the future. I'm going to show you how this works. That he was the Israeli president from 2014 to 2021, and that matters, this length of time that he's been in office, because he's still a president as we move forward through 2028. I believe he will be alive and will be affected by what's coming in the next 6.5 years. Isaac Herzog, which is Jehoiakim, is now, and like I say, you can Google these in the Bible, in Bible Gateway, and you can see these names and how they pop up. I'm going to sort of show you how this all works. That he is now the new president of Israel, and that on July 9th of this year, he will become the new president. And so this is his first year, where Revlin's been in 7 years already. Okay, so these amount of years matter. I want you to understand that. Okay, you've got to look at the amount of time these presidents have been in office, because that matters to the date stamps that I'm giving you later. So Reuben Rivlin came in 2014 and was the president until 2021. So he's been a president for 7 years up to this point. Isaac Herzog is Jehoiakim, where Revlin's Zedekiah. He's the newest president of Israel, and this is his first year. Okay, and that matters. Erdogan, which I believe is modern-day Nebuchadnezzar, has been the president of Turkey since he was elected in 2002. Now, he did not be placed into office in 2003, but he was elected in 2002, and he has been the sitting president since. And so, if you look at the amount of time that Erdogan's been in place, he's been there for 19 years already. Okay, so this guy's been around a long time, and he is the catalyst that's going to change the Middle East. He's the one that's going to bring back the new Ottoman Empire. He's the one that's going to bring back the caliphate against the Jews and the Gentiles. He's the one that's going to do the damage and bring a quarter of the world into war in the Middle East, because he is the white horseman, or Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39. And I'm going to show you how all this ties together as we move forward here. So I want to go through how I found this paradigm. I've been a programmer most of my life, and so as I look at, pages and pages of line code and different things, I see similarities in code and different things like that. And so when I saw these similarities running through the major prophets, I started to match this stuff up, and I want to show you how I came up with these conclusions, so that you can follow along and it's just not, oh, he's making this stuff up. This is extremely important information I want to share with you so that you can understand what's potentially coming up. Now, is this stuff going to happen? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball here. All I can show you is the connections. We can look at them and see what happens in the next 6.5 years as things move forward, and maybe I'm just wrong. But these three kings or leaders are going to matter to us, and the times they've been in office or been leaders of these countries will matter as I show you this paradigm of the three modern day kings. So I saw these common names that run through the main prophets, and so I wanted to see if you Googled Zedekiah or Jehoiakim, especially these two names, what that would show me. And so I typed in Zedekiah. This would search the whole Bible for the King James Version. If you click on that, that brings you up these results. And so anytime Zedekiah is mentioned in the Bible, it would come up in this result area, okay? The same thing with Jehoiakim, and even some of Nebuchadnezzar. But Nebuchadnezzar runs through all of the Bible, and so it's hard to follow it. But it isn't hard to follow Zedekiah and Jehoiakim, because they're only in so many different books, and each of these books say exactly the same thing. And I'm going to show you how this is working. But I also found that when I was looking through these different scriptures and verses, that we would start to see what I call date stamps. And you're going, well, what do you mean by date stamps? That if you look at these different things that he's presenting here as Zedekiah or Jehoiakim, we realize that he has what I call date stamps. And here's a really good example of one of them. Zedekiah, the king of Judah, in the 4th year of the 5th month, had something happen. Okay? So in this one, Zedekiah, which I indicate in my modern day prophecy would be Reuben Revlin, in his 4th year, in the 5th month, that something would happen. Okay? You're saying, wow, that's reaching out there. But I think if you use the times that those three leaders are in place, or have been in place, Revlin, Herzog, and Erdogan, and you equate them to these three kings that I'm talking about, and you use the span of time that they've been in office with the time stamps that are given here, it builds us a map of things to come. And so as we move through here, I'm going to show you how this all links together. Okay? But you're going to start to realize that Jeremiah is saying the same thing as Ezekiel and a lot of these other prophets are saying also. So if we go to the paradigm of the three modern day kings that I built, that I found through searching these names of these kings out within the Bible, it indicates that certain prophets said the same thing about these same kings. Okay, and so we have to look at the correlations that they were giving us and why Jeremiah, Isaiah, Daniel are all talking about basically the same things, and that's important to what's coming up. And so I indicate that this affects three modern day kings. It actually affects four, because it's also going to affect the king of Egypt, or the president of Egypt also as we move forward here. So but it does not name the fourth king, or the king of Egypt. And so I only indicate that it indicates three modern day kings in this prophecy. Reuben Revlin is Zedekiah. He's been in office for 7 years. He will be a factor as we move forward in the next 6.5 years, especially the next 4 years. That Isaac Herzog is Jehoiakim, that he is the new president of Israel, and that will become the new president on July 9th. That I originally thought it was Netanyahu. Didn't know. I had no clue who the new president was going to be. Now that Netanyahu is voted out, we realize now who all the players are. So I don't have to guess at this anymore, because all the players are here. They're in place. And that the last of the three modern day kings that will be affected is Nebuchadnezzar, which I believe is modern day Erdogan of Turkey, and has been the prime minister or the president of Turkey, or the leader of Turkey since 2002 when he was elected as prime minister and then became the president. So this guy's been there for 19 years already. Now, as we move into these different timestamps that Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel gives us along with other scripture, we realize that it could reflect the times that these three leaders are in office today. And so this is important information that should not be just thrown away, and I'm trying to explain this so that you can see where I found this information, because I believe it is that important. Okay, and I built a timeline on this, and I didn't have to modify any of the timeline to make this all work. And even after I found the prophecy of the 70 shepherds and how it could potentially affect the presidents and the 12 leaders from the nation of Israel as we move forward from 1948 into the future, it still didn't affect the timeline. So I have to believe there may be something to this timeline that I have in front of me. So when these major prophets indicated and indicate multiple time, months, days, years, that certain kings were in place and certain events would happen in these very specific dates, that we should look at them, and maybe God gave them to us for a reason. So let's say when we look at Jeremiah here, 52:30, and it indicates in the 3 year of Nebuchadnezzar. So if you take Nebuchadnezzar, this is the modern day Nebuchadnezzar. From past to future, we're going to see God always has events occur in the past that seem to radiate into the future and mimic or mirror what occurred in the past, because he's teaching us what we should know here so that we know what to look for in as we move forward. So we need to understand why he's doing this, and that he's basically showing us a roadmap here if we look at it. So when it says the 23rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, and we equate that to Erdogan of today, his 23rd year would be from 2002, 23 years would be 2025. And so I take these stamps based on the amount of time that these leaders are in place, okay? Based on the king that it's talking about, okay? So if the 23rd year of Nebuchadnezzar in today's dates, as we move into the future, if that is Erdogan, then he's talking about 2025, because you'd have to take 2002, this would be the 23rd year, that'd be 2025, and so it indicates that the captain of the guard carried away the Jews 745 persons, all the persons were 4,600. Okay, now this is an extremely important event that occurs later in 2025 that I show you on the timeline. And I'll bring you back to this because it does matter as we move forward. So each of these prophets indicate dates and times when certain things would occur and that certain things would happen within those time frames. And so I want to show you why I believe this is extremely important to us. So if we go to this next verse, and hopefully I can make all this, I'm trying to show you examples of what I mean by these date stamps first, and then I'm going to take you into the timeline so you can see what I'm talking about. So in the second example, it came also in the days of Jehoiakim, which is the Isaac Herzog. Okay, realize he just got elected. This was his first year. at the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah. So if you come up here, Zedekiah's 11th year, if he would come in 2014 would be 2025, that the son of the king of Judah would be carried away into captivity in the 5th month. So which would be, now I use the Gentile calendar on this because we're talking about the time of the Gentiles. The Gentiles are trampling the city, I believe, for 1260 days, and I believe that he would put it in a context that we would understand today. He uses the Hebrew Jewish calendar because he uses the moon and the sun and things like that, but I also believe that he understands that we understand the Gregorian calendar, and so when he indicated these things for a reason, they would make sense to us today. So I am using the Gregorian calendar in these date stamps. So if you're asking why I'm using them, that's why. I believe they matter to us today, and they reflect in today and what is coming in the future. And so we need to understand what's coming up as we move forward. And so in the second example, it says, it came also in the days of Jehoiakim, which is, I believe, in Isaac Herzog. So now he's the new president. So we're talking about now, the son of Josiah, the king of Judah, until the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah, the son of Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, is carried into captivity in the 5th month. So in Jeremiah 39:2, reiterated in Jeremiah 52:5, and 2 Kings 25:2, that this would happen in the 5th month of the 11th year of this king. So the 11th year of this king would be 25. The first year of this king would be 21. So this would be his 4th year. Okay, because he's been president. If this was 25, then the 4th year of this king would be 25. So Jehoiakim would still be the president at that time. He's the newest president. His term's 7 years. But it would be the 11th year of this king. And because of that, if you use this timestamp of them carrying away in the 5th month of the 11th year of this king, this would be May of 25. So I'm trying to show you how all of these different kings work together. It's not just, random numbers thrown out here. Why, if it's the 11th year or 2025, that this would be 2025 or this 4th year of this guy's term, and that during this 5th month of this year, this king here would be taken away. And that if you take the 23rd year of Nebuchadnezzar from here, 23 added years, that would be 2025 also, and that he's taking away all these Jews as this king here is taken away into captivity. Is it coincidence that everything ends up in 2025 in these verses here? I don't think so. And so, Erdogan, he will be in power 23 years by 2025, and then the relevant prophecy would be fulfilled that he would then be captured, taken away on the 5th month of 2025. So hopefully this makes sense in how I'm presenting this. that these three modern day kings work in tandem together in the timeline that I give you, and that all of the modern day prophets were alluding to this timeline, and that they give you physical dates and stamps of things that are going to occur as we move into the future. So I think it's extremely important that the 11th year of Zedekiah would be in 2025, would be the 4th year of this presidency of Isaac Herzog, so he would be, that would easily fall within the frame of this, because in the days that he's the president of the 11th year of Revlin, which, now understand, Revlin's not the president after 21, but he is a sitting president. Okay, so you have to conceive that he potentially would be a major factor as we move forward if Israel and Jerusalem is under duress and destruction. And if Isaac Herzog has something happen to him, Revlin is also going to play a major factor as we move forward. I'm going to show you how that occurs here in a few minutes. So if Erdogan has been in power for 23 years, to 2025, from 2002 to 23 years is 25, Erdogan is going to play a major factor in this prophecy. But as I've said for some time, and I'm going to try to explain this as we move forward into this video, I believe Erdogan will die on the 6th seal because he is the white horseman. He's the first seal that's being unleashed, and a quarter of the planet is going to be placed under war. This will bring out the next 2 horsemen of famine, pestilence, disease, death. Actually, the next 3 horsemen, because you have the red horseman, which is war. You have the black horseman, which is famine and pestilence upon the planet. And then you have the pale horseman, which is the 4th horseman, which is death. And what follows death? Hades and hell, which are attached to the bottomless pit or the lake of fire. So that's extremely important, that if you look at the 4th seal, Hades and hell are moving with this horseman. So they're moving the bottomless pit to the time of destruction of Erdogan, which dies on the 6th seal. Now the 5th seal is the martyrs that are from all the destruction of the first 4 seals in the Middle East, and a quarter of the planet being under war, and then the 5th seal is opened, and the martyrs are looking at God saying, when are Jesus looking? Because if you look at chapter 6 in Revelation, it's all about Jesus and the Lamb. Okay, the whole chapter 6 of Revelation is about the Lamb and Jesus getting the scroll and opening the 7 seals. And when you get to 6:16, we talk about the wrath of the Lamb, not the wrath of God, which is in Revelation 15:1. So you need to look at that. And so if Erdogan is the first seal, the white horseman that's going to unleash the catalyst against the Middle East, bring a quarter of the planet under war, then we have to realize that he then would die on the 6th seal, and then that takes us into Ezekiel 38:39. Okay. Daniel 8 happens just prior to that because Iran is part of that 10 Muslim coalition. And so I've been saying for a while, Daniel 8, 1 through 10 is probably going to occur and see the destruction of Iran by the end of this year. And that the Medes or the Kurds have to join or align with Iran prior to this happening, and Erdogan crushing both these nations. But let's not get into that yet. So we're going to get into that as we move forward. So let's go forward with these timestamps, because I believe that they're important. And then I'm going to actually start to get into the actual timeline as we move down here. So just hold on. I know this is a long video, and it has a lot of information you probably already lost, but I'm hoping I explained some of this properly. So if we go to Jeremiah 21:1, and like I say, I showed these verses. You need to look at these verses because they say the exact same things. Okay? The exact same things. Okay? That's the reason they're here. So if you look at these different verses, and I can do this real quick. So we go to Jeremiah 39. So I did a search on Zedekiah, and if you look at Jeremiah 32 or 39 verse 2, it indicates in the 11th year of Zedekiah, in the 4th month of the 9th day of the month, the city was broken up. And so this is saying the same thing as Jeremiah 52:5. Okay, right here. So the city was besieged until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. Okay. So the 11th year of King Zedekiah, which is Revlon, would be 2025. And if you go back to the verse that I was just talking about, 39:2, in the 11th year of Zedekiah, in the 4th month, April, of the 9th day, the city was broken up. And so, why is he giving us these very specific days and years of these kings? And he does this multiple times. And so, like I said, if you take the times that those three presidents, Erdogan, Herzog, and Revlon, have been in place, and you use these scriptures in the time frame that these modern day kings have been in place, that they actually start to build a time map. And so in the 11th year of Revlon, in April 9th, so April 9th of 2025 would be the 11th year of Zedekiah, if you're following what I'm talking about here. Because if you go back to that original drawing or text file that I showed you of these three major presidents, the 11th year of Zedekiah would be 2025. And we just talked about all the stuff that might happen in the year 2025. And here's that third verse in 2 Kings 25:2. And the city was besieged until the 11th year of the King Zedekiah. So I've been talking about Israel being besieged for up to 2 years, from 23 to 25 in my timeline. And so the city was besieged until the 11th year of Zedekiah, which would be in 2025. So I think it's extremely important. But something extremely terrible happens to this king in 25 as we move forward, and I want to show you that as we get into this modern day paradigm of the three kings. So if Erdogan has been in power for 23 years, from 2002, 23 years would be 2025. Okay, and then this would fulfill what I call the Revlon prophecy, because he's captured, taken away to Babylon, as I show you as we move forward into this prophecy. Actually, both Herzog, Isaac Herzog is captured in 2023 based on my prophecy or my paradigm, and Revlin is taken into captivity in 2025. And so that's why I believe the prophecy of the 70 shepherds is important with presidents of Israel, because that would then fulfill why Antichrist, once he's on the ground, would have to place a governor into position, and that governor would die, and that would be the 12th king, or the end of his season. And then shortly after that, we would see the coming back of the Lord Jesus on the seventh trumpet during the Feast of Trumpets in 2027 on October 2nd and 3rd. And yes, we cannot give specific times or dates, but there is a 2-day festival, and God will, as he did fulfill his spring festivals in the crucifixion and rising of our Lord Jesus in the past, the spring feasts have been fulfilled. But now we have to fulfill the fall feast, and that is coming up in the next 6.5 years. So in Jeremiah 21:5, it indicates this, and like I say, I'm going to get into this timeline here pretty soon, and this is extremely important. I'm going to have to bring the timeline up to show you exactly what I mean here on this one. So in Jeremiah 25:1, the word that came to Jeremiah concerning all people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim. So now we're into the 4th year of Herzog, which would be 2025. Wow, 2025 is a big year, I'm telling you, people. The son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, that was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar of the king of Babylon. Okay, now you're confusing everybody I know at this point. You're saying, wow, that's incredible, because you just told me that this is the 23rd year of Erdogan. So how, if he's Nebuchadnezzar, would he then be the 1st year of this king, when it's the 4th year of Jehoiakim up here, which would be in 2025? This doesn't make any sense, because the reason for this is that Erdogan will die on the 6th seal in 2024 actually. And 7 months later, as I show you on my timeline, he would be resurrected into Antichrist. As Isaiah 14 tells us clearly 3 times, Antichrist will be resurrected as Satan is thrown from heaven to the ground, impregnates 2 beasts, the sea of the earth, or the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth, the false prophet and Antichrist, and controls these 2 figures, but never touches the grave. That he literally pulls this being out of the abyss that is being held in Hades and hell, and this is being sprung as an abominable branch upon the planet, as Satan is being thrown from heaven forever. And clearly God tells us in that the heavens will rejoice because he no longer exists there. But woe to the planet, because now Satan is among you on the ground. Okay, so we need to understand that this is extremely important in why the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar would be the 4th year of Jehoiakim, and that if Erdogan dies in 2024, that this would then be the 1st year, because the 1st year between 2024 and 2025 would be the 1st year of Antichrist. Okay? Because Erdogan will die on the 6th seal at the end of 2024, and 7 months later will be resurrected into Antichrist. And this is why the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon will be the first year of Antichrist, because he's going to die during the siege of Jerusalem, and it shows us these timestamps. I'm going to go over this real quick. I know this is a lot of information piled on everybody, but there's so much here, and it's hard to explain because there is just that much depth to it. And so, why is Nebuchadnezzar the first year of the king of Babylon? Because I believe Erdogan will die and be resurrected and then brought into as an Antichrist supernatural being in 25. Okay, and I'm going to show you how all this works on my timestamp as we move down through here. I believe that Revlon will be taken away to Babylon on April 9th of 2025 based on Jeremiah 39, 2 through 11 and 52, 6 through 10 if you take those time stamps. So this will be the 4th month of the 9th day of the 11th year of Zedekiah, okay, or the 4th year of Jehoiakim, or the first year of Antichrist, or Erdogan just perished the year prior to this, and then we had a burial effect, and then a resurrection of an Antichrist as Satan is being thrown out of heaven. And this is why I call it the prophecy against Revlon, since it indicates what will happen to him and both of his sons. And Revlon does have 2 sons that will both be affected at the end. Both Revlon and Herzog will play important roles in the attack of Israel and Jerusalem in the end days. Israel will have one president at the time, Herzog, but both presidents will be activated during the time of distress, because Herzog is actually indicated that he is captured and removed for 3 years into captivity, and so he's not a major factor after 23, and that Revlon is also taken away into captivity into 2025. Okay, and so both of these kings will be out of commission, will not play a factor at the end, and this is why Antichrist will place in a governor at the very end, and that is the 12th leader of the 70 shepherds, of the last 12 of the modern day shepherds or kings, would be this last governor, and that he would be killed shortly after being placed into position by a person around Jehoiakim or in his court, someone within Isaac Herzog's group would find these group of 60 people that are clearly within this prophecy, that they would, or 70 people, excuse me, that they would kill 60 of these people, and that then they would barter due to their dire situation in Israel and Jerusalem with famines, plagues, swords. 2/3 of the Jews are dead, 1/3 have been taken away, that they have nothing left, and that they are starving to death, and so that they would cling to this offer that these 10 people give them at the end. And I will show you how all this works together. So, I do believe Benjamin Netanyahu, the 9th Prime Minister of Israel, will play a major factor. He's actually the 12th Prime Minister, but he's been Prime Minister before, so you got to look at all the different times he's been there. He was in office in 2009, and he's also back in office in 2021. So it will affect these people. And so we're going to start to look at these timestamps in my calendar of events, and how my timelines and flow charts work hand in hand with not only the 70 shepherds, the paradigm of the three modern day kings, and how the parable of the fig tree all matter with Daniel 8 and 12, and the 1260 days, the 1290 days, the 1335 days, and the 2300 days and mornings and nights, and how all these things affect us. So if you go to my eschatology page at endofdaysurvival.com, and you go down just a little ways into the front page, you'll notice I have 3 PDF files. One of 117-step calendar of events. This takes you from the beginning of Revelation all the way to the end. It also breaks out 3 additional visions John has while he's in heaven, one of the nations and peoples, one of Mystery Babylon, and one of the elect, and how all of these are chronological events. If you break the 3 visions out, they have verses attached to each and every step, and so you can follow along directly in your Bible. I'm going to go to this one first because I think this is important in that the 70 shepherds would be included in this PDF file, which is Nebuchadnezzar's statue. And so if you click on this PDF and you allow it to generate, you'll realize that I have brought up this PDF file here, which goes through the 8 kingdoms that are talked about. How we have 7 main kingdoms, but then we have a wound to the head of the 7th kingdom that turns into a diversified 8th kingdom. Okay? But it also goes over the history of the Jews and all of the rulers of the Jews. So if you click in here, you can see that all of these have all of the rulers, the kings, the times the kings were in place, how each of these areas of the statue are being affected throughout the history of the Jews, and how we are now into the Ottoman Empire and Erdogan, where the Ottoman Empire did not die in World War I. It's being reconstituted, and Erdogan wants to bring this back by 2023. So you can see the history of how all these kingdoms come together and how they go from 10 full Muslim nations are then just destroyed on the 6th seal, diversified down to 4 kingdoms, and then when Antichrist comes out, he overthrows the 3 additional kingdoms, and those 4 regions then become the beast system, or the area of the beast system, or the kingdom of the Middle East that he builds and develops over there. So this is a pretty important chart. It has a lot of information, goes over the transitions of the 8 kingdoms and how I believe the 7th head was wounded and turns into the 8th kingdom. And the reason I think this is extremely important is that if you bring this out, you'll realize that there's only 8 kingdoms. And so after the 6th kingdom, the 7th kingdom is all about the Ottoman Empire. Okay? And that it never really died in World War I, and that this 10 Muslim nations are going to come together, be destroyed, and then converted into a beast kingdom before they're done, as I'm going to show you in this timeline that I'm presenting to you in this next PDF file. So this is the timeline I built for the timing of Daniel 1, 8, 12. It also works with Psalm 90:10, Jeremiah and Ezekiel prophecies of the modern day, 3 modern day kings, and I believe now that I've found the prophecy of the 70 shepherds, it also works in that realm also. And so let's go into this. I'll show you where I found this information, show you how it all works together. So the first thing I did was I wanted to understand what Psalm 90:10 was telling us. And that if you go to Psalm 90:10, that it clearly tells us the years of the life are 70, which are 70 of the Jews, and that by reason of strength or 80 years, that all things would happen prior to this 80th year, and that they would then fly away before this ending of this 80th year. And so I always come back to the top here, that if you go out to the outer limit here, that May 14th of 2028 would be the final day, the last possible day of the strong generation of Israel, and that all things would have to occur prior to that. So that's where I get that. It's not because I say that, it's because God tells us that the 40 nation, or the 80th year, the strong generation, would go through the toil and trouble, but then would fly away prior to their strength leaving them. And so if you look at this generational chart, we had the state of Israel proclaimed as a nation in May 14th of 1948. The 70th generation would be May 14th of 2018. And the 80th generation would be May 14th of 2028. And this is the parable of the fig tree generation, that all things would happen prior to the end of the strong generation. Now, once I got into this parable of the fig tree, I also used Daniel 8 and 12, because they talk about the 1290 days, the 1335 days, and the 2300 days. And then we all know about abomination occurring 1260 days after the signing of the treaty. The Gentiles are going to trample the city for 1260 days, 42 months, or 3.5 years. So I believe these 4 dates are important to map out and understand. So when we look at these 4 sets of dates, how do they work in this parable of the fig tree? And why do I believe that some are getting the 1290 days wrong, and that they're moving it forward and not backwards? I'll show you why that is. Okay, so let's say we go to Daniel 12 first, okay, and then we'll come back to Daniel 8, because I think it sort of works better this way. So in Daniel 12, and I use the Revised Standard Version, I've got an older Bible. I also refer to the King James Version, because I believe they are the most proper in their understanding of, and not been manipulated as much as some of the other Bibles or texts. So if we go to this Daniel 12 and read this, the 11, 12, and 13 verses. And from the time the continual burnt offerings are taken away, so the continual burnt offerings are taken away, and then the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest, and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of the days. So what this is telling us is this, and this is why I think people get this wrong. The continual burnt offerings are taken away, And between the time they're removed and abomination, there's 1,290 days. So that's how I get this. So if you stop the continual burnt offerings here, 30 days later we would see the signing of the treaty, and then you have 1,260 days to abomination. So if you subtract the 1,290 days from the 1,260 days, that would be 30 days prior. We would have 30 days prior to the stopping of the continual burnt offerings. Then you would see the signing of the treaty. The Gentiles would trample the city for 1,260 days, and then we would see abomination of desolation. And so I think it's extremely important how Daniel states it here, that the continual burnt offerings will be taken away, an abomination is set up, and that 1,290 days would occur between that gap. But we know that the city's trampled for 1,260 days. But to abomination, not after abomination, to abomination. And so the 1,290 days, to me, in my understanding, and you may disagree with this, would be that the continual burnt offerings have to stop 30 days prior to the signing of the covenant of death, and then we have 1,260 days to abomination. And so this is extremely important, because if you see Antichrist around this time of March 21st of 2024 stop the continual burnt offerings, then 30 days later you're going to see a signing of the covenant of death with the 7-year treaty with the nations. So we will then know where we are in time, and so we can see that on this map and this timeline, how this is happening in front of us and where we are in real time. But it also indicates that you're a blessed person if you make it to the 1,335 days. And so what I say is this: the 2 witnesses come out and prophesy for 1,260 days. The elect are chosen back here on the 7th seal. They go against Antichrist, and most of them perish before the Lord comes back on the 7th trumpet. And so there's going to be a lot of destruction of the 144,000. Christians and Jews are going to be under tremendous duress. The 2 witnesses will perish after abomination. We see them perish, lie in the street for 3.5 days, and then are resurrected. And we know that God shortens that second half to 1,335 days. And so from the signing of the treaty, 1,335 days forward, 75 days after abomination, we end up at the Feast of Trumpets on October 2nd and 3rd of 2027, when I believe the Lord Jesus comes back. Okay? But in Daniel 8, it indicates something else that's extremely important that we need to look at, the 2,300 days and nights. And so Daniel 8:13, verse 13 says this: "When I heard the Holy One speaking, and another Holy One said to the one that spoke, How long is this vision concerning the continual burnt offerings?" The continual burnt offerings. "The transgression that makes desolate," abomination of desolation, "and the giving over the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot," 1,260 days that the Gentiles trample the city, "then the sanctuary would be restored to its rightful state," which I believe happens on the Feast of Tabernacles on October 16th and 17th of 2027, because what is occurring? The Lord comes comes back to earth on the seventh trumpet. The rapture occurs here. Right after that, after the Lord comes back, the rapture occurs. The church is removed. All the believers are taken away. The rest of the saints and the elect are taken away. The two witnesses have now just been raptured. We are removed. And now he's dropping the bowls, the 7 bowls. And then he cleanses the earth on the 7th bowl in 1 hour of God's wrath, which is Revelation 15:1. He starts the wrath of God. This is not the same as Revelation 6:16, which is the wrath of the Lamb, which happens at the beginning during the seals or the sorrows. Back here, wrath of the Lamb. This is the wrath of God. And that 15 days after the Lord comes back, in 1 hour of God's wrath, we would see the Feast of Tabernacles, which makes sense because if you take the outer limits of October 2nd, the Feast of Trumpets, to the 17th of October, that is 15 days. So what I did was the cleansing of the sanctuary is being restored. So that would be the furthest timeline that he's giving us to the time of continual burnt offerings. So between the time of the continual burnt offerings, desolation, the sanctuaries being trodden under, there would be 2,300 evening and morning, and the sanctuary would be restored. And so if the sanctuary is restored on the Feast of Tabernacles, prior to the strong generation perishing, 80th year, and what are these things here? These are the fall feasts that have to be fulfilled. The Feast of Tabernacle, or Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, and the Feast of Tabernacles prior to the end of the 80th generation. And I've said for a while that the shofar that they blew back here on September 9th and 20th of 2020, which brought forth the king of the north, which is Erdogan, or the first seal, which is broken back here, and I'm going to go over this in a second, was actually a omen of terrible things to come to the Israelites, because they should have never blown the shofar at this point. The 70th blowing of the shofar should have occurred here in the third temple to bring the Lord back on the 7th trumpet. That when they blew this here, this was a judgment against Israel that would bring on this destruction that's coming up after, I say, the 2300 days starts. And so if you take the 2300 days from the cleansing of the sanctuary, the 7th bowl is dropped, the earth has been re-cleansed, God is now with us because we are tabernacling with him. We are in heaven because we've been raptured. The bowls have dropped on the wicked. The book of life is going to be opened shortly. God is now with us. And so if you take the cleansing of the sanctuary, 2300 days back from October 17th of 2027, 2300 days. You can do this on any calendar date on Google. That takes you to June 30th. Well, what did we just have? We had 3 supermoons and a blood moon last month, and another supermoon coming up as we walk into June 30th. We had the Israeli elections go badly. Netanyahu's been thrown out. We have a new president and a new prime minister, and so a lot of things are happening. So if we go to the start of this calendar, and this works with the modern day paradigm of the 3 modern day kings, which I'm going to get into. We're going to go back to that. I know there's a lot here. Please work with me. I know there's so much involved here. So I believe Erdogan, which is the white horseman, invaded Syria on Yom Kippur which is the Day of Atonement on October 9th of 2019, that he unleashed the first seal, that Jesus broke the first seal in heaven, unleashed the white horseman. Erdogan took his 30-mile buffer zone in Syria, and this started the beginning of the quarter of the world going into war and the ramping up of the Middle East. But we also saw just shortly after that, if I blow this up just a little bit, right after October and Erdogan invaded into Syria, the COVID-19 reports started coming out of China, and that during mid-October we started to see reports. Now, it didn't get over here until December 31st, January 1st, but the first initial reports came out right after Erdogan invaded. And so is he starting to unleash the second and third seal now that he's been, he started his invasion of the Middle East, and he hasn't stopped since. You can watch Erdogan is basically in the news all the time now. He's pushing the Kurds towards Iran and genociding them, and now he's taken, just the other day, he's taken the airport in Afghanistan and is talking about controlling Afghanistan. So he's had a huge, last year and a half, he's had a huge advantage that no one's really stopped him on any level. And so we saw the COVID come out just shortly after he invaded. And then I talked about, I did 3 videos on why I believe the shofar blowing on the Sabbath on September 19th and 20th on the Feast of Trumpets on a prohibitive day, not in the temple. They blew it out on the streets, not in their homes. They all came out on the rooftops, and the whole world blew shofars. And God told them clearly, this is a warning to Israel and Judah in Jeremiah 4, 5 through 9, that the king of north would be unleashed against them if they did this. That this should not have occurred, and that I believe that this blowing of the shofar should have only occurred after the third temple is been rebuilt, and it has to occur on the Feast of Trumpets during 2027, which is October 2nd and 3rd, and that this would also bring back the Lord on the 7th trumpet. And so there's a lot happening there. Now, some of that is speculation, and you guys can say whatever you want about that, but I believe these things matter, and I believe God does them for a purpose, and I believe the 70th shofar has to be blown in the temple, and that there has got to be a group of people that have to be in there as Antichrist is going off, and that they're going to have to figure out how to blow the shofar on God's temple, in his temple, to bring the Lord back. It's just that simple. There's a process. Whether that is the case, I don't know, and I'm probably the only one that thinks this. But so if the shofar was a warning and is the ramping up of Erdogan into Syria, we started to see those 3 blood moons occur just in the last 3 months. So I did this video about the 3 super moons, one on April 27th, one on May 26th, which was also a full blood moon, super moon, which I believe is an omen of things to come in the near future. And this is a 3, God loves 3s, and that the next one, which is coming up on the 24th, which would be another supermoon, I believe it's called the strawberry supermoon, if I'm not mistaken, will happen on the 24th, and then we would go into that June 30th, start of the 2300 days that I've been talking about on my chart. So the June 30th is to me an extremely important date, because we start that 2300 days that Daniel was talking about in Daniel 8, 13 and 14, and how I believe that this will bring on and has brought on the sorrows and the birth pains. Now, I believe the sorrows and the birth pains run from the time Erdogan was released on October 9th of 2019 to the time of the signing of the treaty with the nations, and at that point then we would start tribulation of the 1260 days to abomination, and then once abomination occurs we have great tribulation. Some people will disagree with that, but I think it clearly states that we will be in the sorrows and the birth pains up to the time of the dragon coming out, the woman being followed into the wilderness for 1260 days. That starts tribulation, and that's 1260 days where the Gentiles trample the city. So you have the last supermoon on the 24th. We get into June 30th, which I believe starts at 2300 days. I believe that will then start a ramping up of these modern day prophecies that I'm talking about, these paradigms, and how the 70 shepherds will matter, how these will all affect us as we move forward in the next 6.5 years, and how after June 30th we will start to see a ramping up of Daniel 8, 1 through 10, where we have the goat ram war, which I believe is the seals war. I call it the seals war 1 through 6, where Erdogan comes out as a white horseman as the first seal is being released, and that he will die on the 6th seal. But there's a process between these sets of seals, 1 through 6. And that Turkey would destroy both Iran and the Kurds, or Persia and the Medes. That from this destruction of Daniel 8, 1 through 10, we would see the new Ottoman Empire formed and Erdogan crowned as the new Ottoman Emperor. He is now given a crown. It tells us clearly in the first seal that the white horseman is given a crown and then goes forth conquering and to conquer, and brings a quarter of the world into war, which is the Middle East, in the next 3 seals. That Joel 1 indicates that there would be a locust and plagues against Israel that decimate it, prior to Joel 2, which is a third of the Israels die by plagues, a third die by the sword. I believe that is Gog of Ezekiel 38:39. Once Iran is absorbed, that will then start to build the 10-nation coalition that go against Israel. Israel will be attacked. Erdogan and his 10 nations will die by the wrath of the Lamb in 6:16. It's not the wrath of God. The wrath of God is 15:1. The wrath of the Lamb is 6:16. The 6th seal is broken. Erdogan dies. They're buried for 7 months. There's silence in heaven for a half an hour. So you have to equate that to our time down here. 15 days or so. We have a selection of 144,000 elect on the 7th seal. 4 trumpets. Then, okay, so I want to start by saying this. So once the 7th seal is broken, so all 7 seals are broken at this point. In Revelation 8, 1 and 2, it clearly states that when the 7th seal is broken, then and only then the 7 trumpets are handed out. Okay? So if you're stating that the sixth seal somehow ends up in a trumpet phase or a bowl phase, then you need to look at Revelation 8:1 and 2. Clearly look at it. Read it for what it states, not what you think it says. And it clearly says this. Once the seventh seal is broken, God then hands out the seven trumpets, and the angels go forth and blow them. So once God hands out the seven trumpets, the first four decimate a third of the earth. They decimate the green grass. They decimate the oceans and the waters. Wormwood comes down and poisons a third of the waters on the planet. I've always said that this is the Asian nations because they do not believe in Jesus, and he's going to judge them for where they stand in life as they are now. This is about the Christian Jews and the Muslims, and so a third of the world decimated by four trumpets would occur logically where? The communist areas that aren't being affected by biblical prophecy. And so if you cut out the nations of the communist world, that's about a third of the land area. And so I believe that is where that will occur. From this destruction of Gog and his burial of 7 months, we will start to see these 10 nations that have been destroyed by God, by Jesus actually, the wrath of the Lamb in 6:16, form into 4 regions, as Daniel tells us. That then the bottomless pit would open up, because I told you before, the fourth seal, Hades and hell, is following Erdogan to his destruction. Then, as Satan is being thrown out of heaven, he will be resurrected as Michael standing on both sides of the bottomless pit. He's pulling Satan from heaven. Revelation 13 and 12, and you can go to a number of these different things. 13 is where he talks about the 2 beasts and how he's pulling Satan from heaven and throwing him down to the earth. And Isaiah talks about how Satan is being thrown to earth and impregnating 2 beasts, the beasts of the sea and the earth, and how Antichrist and the false prophet will rise and he will control both beings, but it's not Satan. Satan is controlling these 2 beings and impregnating them. But this will be a resurrectional event from the death of Gog into Antichrist on the 6th trumpet, which is the little horn rising. Also, the false prophet rises with him on the 6th trumpet. And then Antichrist would overthrow the other 3 regions that form from the 10 nations, that form down to 4 regions. Those 4 regions, 1 region will dominate, which is the Antichrist, or the little horn, which comes from Turkey. The other 3 regions will capitulate because they know this is a supernatural nightmare and they can't do anything about this, and so they will just capitulate and join quickly. And this will then form a new beast kingdom, or diversified beast kingdom, of the 4 regions that broke down from the 10 original destruction of Gog. So this is how the beast diversified kingdom will form. And this then starts to take us into this paradigm of the modern day kings, because as we start to see all this happen down here, we're also seeing all these additional events occur in between this. And so if you go from June 30th, 2021 to the stopping of the continual burnt offerings, which I say is on March 21st of 2024, all this will occur from the start of the Seals War of Daniel 8 and the Goat and Ram War to the forming of the diversified beast kingdom. But in the middle of all this, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and these main prophets talk about this paradigm and how these dates that they give us, that I had talked about before earlier in the video, how these date stamps will matter. And so if we blow these things up and we look at the verses, as he shows us here, you'll start to realize that these things fall directly in line with the calendar that I had originally presented. I did not modify any of this stuff to fit these sections into this timeline. And there's a number of them. You actually have a couple, 2 or 3 here, because you've got this section here, which has been added. This section, which has been added. And then we get into the bowl phase at the end here. But Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Daniel all talked about the same events occurring on these very specific dates. Remember the month, the day, and the year of those 3 kings that I've talked about in the modern day paradigm. So if the shofar was blown here, and we see that that brought the king of the north against, starting to bring the king of the north against Israel in the near future as we move into June 30th, this was a bad thing, because normally when they blow this on a forbidden day, that's a bad omen. We get into September 7th of 2021, we start the new sabbatical year, and that works to the end of the 6th year, which is right before the Feast of Trumpets and Tabernacles in 2027. So that sabbatical year, 6 years before the millennial 7th year, or the last year, would end here, right before the Feast of Trumpets. And so I believe that's an extremely important date that we should look at, that the sabbatical year would start in September of 21 and end right before the Feast of Trumpets in October 27. That we would see the crowning of Erdogan, I believe, at the tomb of Suleiman Shah. That's just my opinion. I believe he's very fond of this area, and that's where he will be christened as the White Horseman. He will receive his White Horse crown. We will see the fall equinox of September 22nd of 2022 occur. This will start us into the death cycle. And that the first year of the sabbatical year would end in September 26th of 22. And then that would then start to lead us into what I call this modern day paradigm of the 3 kings. And so we're going to start talking about how that works into this last part of this paradigm. So I've said for a while, Joel 1 has to occur first. And you'll start to see locusts affect Israel prior to Gog attack. Because you have to have Joel 1. A third of the Jews die by famine and plagues. And then a third die by the sword. And then a third are taken away to the hidden place. And so there is a process in how God does this. And he always does it this way. Whenever he goes against a nation, they're always attacked by locusts and plagues first. Then they're attacked by the sword. And then there's a remnant that always seem to slip away. So we need to look at why he does that. And so I'm guessing that God's pretty much set in his ways. And so he doesn't change things. He tells us for a reason that these things are going to happen. So once we get into this locust event prior to October of 23, and we start the paradigm of the 3 modern day kings and those time date stamps that I've been talking about, we're going to start to see them fill in these gaps. Okay, I want to blow this up a little because I want to show you what I'm talking about here. So if we look at that text file that I put together to show you the start of this timeline. This corresponds with this text file that I put together. So if you go from this text file to my timeline, you'll see that these date stamps are exactly what I stated they were on the timeline itself. So you can sort of see this. So I had just talked about in the spring of 23, we're going to see Joel 1 occur, the locusts and plagues, famine start to affect Israel. But then we start into Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Joel talking about similar events and how they're stating almost the exact same things based on these timestamps that I've talked about up here and how I showed you I laid this all out. So in the 10th month of the 10th day of the 9th year of Zedekiah, we're going to see this occur. Jeremiah 52:4 tells us this. Jeremiah 31 or 39:1 also tells us this. Ezekiel 24:1 through 2 talks about this. They all say exactly the same thing, that October 10th of 2023 we would see a besieging of Jerusalem. And I want to go show you that in the actual scripture so you can see where I'm going with this. I'm not going to go through all of these. You can look these up as we're moving through the timeline, or otherwise this video is going to take 4 hours. But I want to show you how I came up with these timestamps so that you can see that I'm not making these dates up. They are literally in here, and that you have to use these dates and add them to the timeline I've given you, that if you do this, we might actually have a roadmap to the end and see when these things are actually going to occur. So, as I said, if you go to Jeremiah 39:1, I'm going to do one example here, and then I'm going to move through this calendar pretty quickly. You can look up the scripture, but they all work the same way, and they all basically work together. Each of these prophets are saying the same thing, exactly the same thing. So in Jeremiah 39:1, it says, in the 9th year of Zedekiah, which is Revelin, so this would be in 23, in the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar or Erdogan and all his army went against Jerusalem and besieged it. So I said in my timeline, if you go look at it, that takes you to this timestamp here, October 10th of 2023, Erdogan or Gog, Ezekiel 38:39, besieges Jerusalem. And I give you all the scripture that works with this stuff. Okay, so I'm not just pulling this stuff out of thin air. I'm showing you exactly where I'm getting this stuff, and that I am using the Gregorian calendar in this process because it works with the Gentile time. You know, the things that we would understand in the New Testament, and how we apply it to the Old Testament, but also works in what's coming up in the future. And so if you look at these timestamps, you'll realize that he's telling us something fairly specific here. Why is he giving us these timestamps? And why are multiple prophets telling us the exact same thing? So in Jeremiah 52:4, it says this, and it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, which would be Zedekiah, in the 10th month of the 10th day of the month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came with all his army against Jerusalem, pitched against it, and built forts around and about it. Now realize they're under siege. They have not broken in the walls, okay? This is the 9th year of Zedekiah, which would be in October of 23, and so they are under attack. They have not actually broken in the walls, and it clearly tells us that the city will be under siege as we move forward here for up to 2 years. And so, as Erdogan is decimated on the 6th seal, it clearly tells us as we move forward there will be a residue that camp around Jerusalem from all these armies. There will be a small group of people that are basically constantly attacking Jerusalem, and over 2 years they finally will accomplish the job and break the walls in and enter the city. So, as you can see, Jeremiah 52:4 is saying the exact same thing as Jeremiah 39:1. But also, we can see that in Ezekiel 24:1 through 2. So, Jeremiah and Ezekiel are saying the exact same things here. I'll read what Ezekiel says in Ezekiel 24:1 through 2. Again, in the 9th year, in the 10th month of the 10th day, so October 10th of 23, we're talking about Zedekiah, of that month, the word came to the Lord, saying to me, Son of man, write the name of the day, the event of the day, the king of Babylon set himself against Jerusalem this same day. So, as Erdogan goes through the Middle East, attacks Iran once the Kurds join them, destroys those two nations, drives through the Middle East to Egypt, and then comes back up into Israel, starts to besiege Jerusalem by October of 23, we will start to see this prophecy take place of this modern day 3 kings. And why is Ezekiel and Jeremiah saying the exact same thing? Why is he telling us on this day of this year of this king that Israel, Jerusalem would be literally under attack, under siege, not totally decimated and captured, but would be under siege for 2 years in this case? And I'll show you later as we move through this that it is actually 2 years that they are under siege. So that's how I came up with the dates that I've added to the timeline. And none of the dates overlap each other. They actually create a procession of events that move through the parable of the fig tree almost perfectly. I had to do nothing but add them to the chart. I didn't change, adjust, or do anything. So it tells us something extremely important as we move through here. What's going to happen to basically all these kings? Erdogan's going to die and be resurrected as Antichrist. Revlin is captured. Isaac Herzog is captured. The president of Egypt, as we move forward here, is also, dealt with strongly and killed. And the 2 presidents of Israel actually do both live. As far as I can tell, neither of them die, but both are under major duress, and we'll explain all these different things as we move through the timeline. So, if you lay out my timeline with this text file, you'll see that a pattern forms, and that it doesn't overlap as I indicated on the chart. And so I'm not going to move back and forth through the chart, because you can pull the chart up and look at the chart as I'm moving through the dates. And the dates that I'm indicating basically go through all of the dates on the chart, so you'll be able to see the timestamps as I'm moving forward here. Do realize that all of these steps do have verses attached, and so you have to look at the timestamps that he's giving you so you can see where these dates are coming from, okay? And how I presented them on the timeline itself. So, if the locust event starts to happen in the spring of 23, prior to the attack of Gog besieging Jerusalem, as I just indicated through those verses, and this also would then include Joel 2, because we're talking about the Jews being attacked by the sword, and Joel 2 is extremely explicit in its detail in how Jerusalem is being attacked and raped and pillaged. Basically, it's terrible. So I won't go into the imagery of that, but you can read Joel 2. That is basically saying what is happening on the ground at the time as the Jews are being basically decimated by plagues. A third are going to die by these plagues, and a third are going to die by the sword, or Erdogan, or Gog of Ezekiel 38:39, as they're being attacked prior to Gog's death on the sixth seal, because Erdogan is the first seal. Erdogan is going to give the 10 nations authority for 1 hour or 10 days to attack Israel or Jerusalem prior to their decimation on the sixth seal, or the wrath of the Lamb, which occurs here. This is not the wrath of God. The wrath of God occurs in Revelation 15:1 when he hands out the 7 bowls. The wrath of the Lamb in Revelation 6:16 is Jesus attacking the nations that have gone against his people. Okay? And it indicates in Daniel 1:1 and 2, verse 1 and 2, that on October 10th of 2023, the sitting president of Israel will be captured in his 4th year and taken away to Babylon, or Turkey, and that Isaac Herzog will be in captivity for up to 3 years, and then will somehow escape or be released, or found a way to be removed into a position where he can rebel against Antichrist himself at the very end. And so if he's taken away in 2023 and in captivity for up to 3 years, in 2026, at the end, right prior to abomination, we will start to see that leader of Israel be effective again. But in reality, he is taken out of the picture. And so will Revlin then step up to the plate because he is the prior president, or potentially someone like Netanyahu or Bennett, which is the new prime minister, step up to the plate to fill this gap as Isaac Herzog, as Erdogan is attacking on the very day that he attacks Jerusalem? It indicates that they're going to capture this president and take him away. Then if you go in 15 days after that attack, he gives those 10 nations authority for 1 hour or 15 days on 1 hour of God is 15 days of our time, to attack Israel, and then they're destroyed by the sixth seal, or the wrath of the Lamb. We have that 7-month burial of Erdogan and his armies in the valley of Ham and Gog. The weapons are burnt for 7 years, which alludes to the 7-year tribulation period that are coming. And I wanted to show you something extremely important about the 7-month burial of Erdogan. So if Erdogan is destroyed on the sixth seal, and then we start that trumpet event, we see him buried for 7 months. So October, you'd have November, December, January, February, March, and we'd start into this continual burnt offerings being stopped. Okay, so there's about a 7-month gap between October and March, and we would then potentially see a resurrection of the 6th trumpet of both Antichrist and the false prophet. The spring equinox kicks in on March 20th, right before The day after that is potentially the stopping of the continual burnt offerings. Antichrist basically overthrows the three regions, and they form into a beast kingdom, and then they sign the treaty with the covenant of death with the nations. And so I think it's extremely important that there's about a 7-month gap between October and March of 23 and 24. And then this is extremely important because when we talked about the first year of the Nebuchadnezzar, and I said that's confusing because we were talking about the 23rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, and now we're talking about the first year of Antichrist. Okay, and that would then happen in 2025 when all that other stuff was occurring. And how would that happen? So we have a 7-month burial, a resurrection of Antichrist in 2024. And so the first year of Antichrist would be 24 to 25. And so Nebuchadnezzar's first king, the first year of his kingdom, of the Antichrist kingdom, would be in 2024. And so it does fit that timeline that I was talking about to you in that text file earlier. So this is how I came to the conclusion that the 4th year of Jehoiakim, which would be Isaac Herzog, that would be in 2025, would be the first year of Antichrist, or Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Why is it the first year of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon? Because Erdogan will die on the 6th seal around those dates, and that he will be resurrected in 24, and that the first year of this king would be between 24 and 25, and so that would match up on the timeline. So if we come back down to the timeline, and we realize that if Erdogan is being brought back as an antichrist, as a resurrectional figure, and Isaac Herzog is captured during this time and taken to Babylon, that he's not going to be a factor for 3 years until he's released somehow, and then affects Antichrist again at the end of 26, beginning of 27, as 2 Kings 24:1 tells us. 15 days later, we see the destruction of these armies. The residue then forms around the city. 4 regions then form from the 10 nations that have been decimated by Jesus himself through the wrath of the Lamb. We have that 7-month burial that takes us into 24. We talk about the start of the weapons being burnt for 7 years, alluding to the 7-year tribulation period, and how the 10 nations now destroyed form into 4 regions or kingdoms. We see the devastation of the first 4 trumpets that devastate the third of the planet, or the communist areas. Then that extremely important warning of Revelation 8:13, which I built the 117 steps off of, one verse, tells us that you have to watch the last 3 woes and the last 3 trumps for a reason, because this is the 5th, 6th, and 7th trumpet. And what are those things? The 5th trumpet is the bottomless pit opening, and the scorpions come out and sting the men for 5 months without the seal of God. They don't kill them, they just sting them, irritate them, and make their lives miserable. But they don't kill them. The 6th trumpet is when the Antichrist rises with the false prophet. So the beasts of the earth and the beasts of the sea rise. We talk about Revelation 13. And Revelation 9, also 9 verse 13, also is included in this. And then we talk about, on that chart, the continual burnt offerings being stopped prior to the signing of the treaty with the nations, 30 days afterwards. And then we start getting back into that modern day paradigm, okay? So Ezekiel 5:12 talks about the plagues that are going to kill a third of the Israelites through famine and plagues, and then a third will die by the sword, and a third will be removed. But also Ezekiel 29:1 and 2, and Ezekiel 30, verse 4 through 10 also state the exact same thing. That Egypt would be under basic plague, and they also, along with Jerusalem, would be affected in the same manner. So as we get into October of 24, we're going to see a prophecy against Egypt and its king. Al-Sisi is the king of Egypt and will be the king of Egypt until he's either killed, removed, or reinstated, or someone else comes into power in 2028. So that would also fall in line with the parable of the fig tree, that he would be a king up to the point of the fulfillment of the parable of the fig tree, which is the strong generation of Israel, the 80th year, or May 14th of 2028. Egypt will be devastated by plagues, famine, and by the sword. Ezekiel 5:12, and I just was talking about this. All nations go under the same duress, under the same way. By plagues, famine, by the sword, and then usually there's a remnant that breaks away. And so we can see these things happen. And if you look at Ezekiel 5, or Ezekiel 29:1 and 2, and Ezekiel 30:4 through 10, it will tell you that this is the time stamp that this is going to occur. In January 7th of 2025, Egypt will be completely broken by Antichrist, and the peoples are scattered throughout the nations. So at this point, Egypt is decimated for the most part. So Egypt and Israel are both under major duress at the same time that this is happening. And that makes sense because Erdogan drives from Iran to Egypt, and Jeremiah talks about those hidden stones that are placed in Egypt itself that Erdogan can't go past, and then he's pulled by the hook back to Israel. And so Egypt is constantly being under war, and it also talks about the king of the north and the king of the south, which is happening in Daniel 11. This is also occurring. So the king of the south is Egypt, and the king of the north is Turkey. And guess what's in the middle of that? Damascus. And Damascus is basically destroyed with no stone left on top of each other by the time it's done. And so we will see the destruction of Damascus during all this, as Jerusalem is being under siege for 2 full years. Okay? So Antichrist is on the ground by 25. Egypt is completely broken, and their peoples are scattered throughout the nations. In March 1st of 25, the king of Egypt and his people will be cut off from the world, and they will be slain by the Assyrian. So, this is a prophecy that involves Al-Sisi, the leader of Egypt, who presides at this very time as a president. He became the president through a coup in 2013 and has held office till now, was reelected in 2014 and then reelected in 2018, and for some reason, and I do not know how the system works over there, will not have another presidential election until 2024. So I think the timing of that's extremely important, because 2024 is when Antichrist Gog would be destroyed, and then we would see the resurrection of Antichrist. And then we talk about right here right prior to this, how Egypt is going to be completely broken by Antichrist and destroyed. And so I think that sort of matches up nicely in the paradigm. So then we switch back to Jerusalem, because now Egypt has basically been devastated. But they're not done with Egypt. Egypt has a smaller ending at the very end of this. There's a little more to their prophecy. So then we switch back to Jerusalem, and on April 9th of 2025, the famine is so severe no food is found in Jerusalem, and the city is finally breached. Okay, so on October 10th of 2023, it was attacked or under siege. And now it's telling us on April 9th of 2025 that the city will be breached and that there is no food left in Jerusalem. And so the city is broken up, the lands are assigned throughout a treaty with the residue of the princes from the 4 regions that are now the new beast kingdom combined. Israel President Revlin flees, which is Zedekiah, to the plains of Jericho, because now the city is breached. There is no food left. Isaac Herzog has already been removed from power in 23 during the original siege and has been taken away for up to 3 years, so he's not in play anymore. Revlin is escaping the city at this point, flees north to the plains of Jericho, and is captured. Jeremiah also, in the original prophecy, which happens from past to future, Jeremiah is removed from the prison that he was held in, taken to Babylon, and placed with this son of this regional leader, which is going to play a major factor in the prophecy of the 70th shepherd, as I'm going to explain here real shortly. This regional leader will die, and he will be the 12th king of the 70th prophecy of the shepherds. He's the last of the 12 of the modern day kings that will die, and that will fulfill the 12th king's season, which will then allow the Lord Jesus to then come back. And this has nothing to do with the prime ministers of Israel. On May 10th, we start into what I call the Revlin prophecy, or part of the paradigm. On May 10th of 2025, based on these verses, Israel and Jerusalem are burned and destroyed. The house of the Lord is burned and destroyed. The king's house is destroyed, and all the houses in Jerusalem are destroyed, because now they are under siege, because the city has been breached. President Revlin, which is captured on the plains of Jericho, which has fled up here, now is under captured. He is taken to Babylon, where his eyes are removed. Both his sons are killed, and he is placed in captivity until his death, or actually until we have rapture, because it indicates that Revlin never dies. And I would suspect that we have a rapture, and then he will be judged in the book of life, and all 70 shepherds are condemned to hell. So this president is already condemned to hell, because God tells us that is what is going to happen. So I have indicated that the third temple would be rebuilt within the 2 years that the time Antichrist comes back out in 24 to the year of 2027. We would, see that third temple rebuilt. They can easily rebuild it in a year. They already have everything in place. The plans are already put together. They're already starting to put the temple together almost. They're at a major drive right now to try to get this temple rebuilt. So we're going to see that temple rebuilt before abomination occurs on July 19th of 2027, based on my timeline of the 1260 days, the 1290 days, the 1335 days, and the 2300 days on the chart that I showed you that I've been working off of. And that on July of 25, the son of Ishmael, and this is extremely important to the prophecy of the 70 shepherds, because Antichrist is going to assign someone to this region, and he will be killed by this person here. So the son of Ishmael in July of 25, and I went through some of the history of who this might be, because it really doesn't indicate anyone. This sort of looks like it might be Netanyahu. I don't know. That's just speculation totally. I don't know if it has anything to do with Netanyahu. But somehow, in Isaac Herzog's court, the son of Ishmael will kill this regional leader that Antichrist has put into place. So Antichrist assigns a regional leader to this area because no president is in place anymore, I believe, and that this son of Ishmael will rise with 10 men and smote this leader, this regional leader that Antichrist has placed into power, that's only there for a very short period of time, and then he kills him. It also tells us that these 10 men kill 60 of the people that are in this group of like 70 people, and that 10 of them will barter their lives because they realize that they have wealth, food, and other things that they need because Israel has nothing up here. And so this son of Ishmael makes a deal with these 10 regional leaders, or these people that are with this regional leader. They barter with them for their lives, and so they do live, and they do take their stuff, and so I'm guessing that's a good deal for the Israelis because they have nothing at that point other than total distress in the city. Their leaders have been taken away, captured, and the city is now breached, and there's no food in the city, and so it's a dire thing in that city. And so, Netanyahu, who does have 2 sons, whether Netanyahu and this are the same guy, I don't know. Is it one of his sons? It could be Abner or Yar. I don't know this for sure, but it does seem that the coincidence of the spelling of Netanyahu and this person are similar almost to the letter. Just speculation there. So as we move into this, it clearly tells us that this regional leader will die, and that the son of Netanyahu, or whoever this guy is, this guy Ishmael up here, will kill this guy, and that he will proclaim a fast before the Lord in September of 26. Then on October 5th of 26, Jerusalem is smitten and destroyed, and Israel is laid desolate and destroyed. This is Ezekiel 33:21 through 33. It gives you this date stamp here. On December 1st of 26, God places lamentation and a net over Egypt and states that he will kill and judge everything there. And so Egypt again is under judgment, as well as Jerusalem is. Now this is affecting multiple countries, even Edom and Jordan, and a number of countries are being affected. But in particularly, Jerusalem and Egypt are being affected by Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel. On December 15th to 26th, a multitude in Egypt are cast down, that they will lie with the heathen in the pit of hell, and that the king of Egypt will perish with all his people. And so the king of Egypt, Al-Sisi, at this time, who is the leader of Egypt at this time and will be till 2028, when he will have a re-election, won't make it that far and will be killed. In July 19th of 2027, I talk about abomination of desolation occurring on that chart, and that by October 2nd and 3rd of 2027, we would have the Feast of Trumpet of Rosh Hashanah, or the seventh trumpet, when the Lord comes back to earth. And shortly after that, we are taken away. At least the elect, the saints, and the martyrs from great tribulation are removed. Because once the book of life opens, then all of the dead from the sea, earth, and hell are then taken to heaven and judged in the book of life, and either thrown in the lake of fire or given eternity. We see on October 10th and 11th of 2027, Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. This falls between the 15 days of October 2nd and the 17th on my chart of the Day of God's Wrath, or the 7 bowls, or the 15 days or 1 hour of God's wrath, which would occur between the 2nd and the 17th. That's 15 days. And so that would then finalize the end of the paradigm, and how each and every one of these dates, stamps, are indicated in a very specific book or through a prophet. And so we can actually look at how I address these date stamps, use the Gregorian calendar due to the time of the Gentiles being trampling the city, and that it deals with us, that we would understand this date stamps in the end, and it's a futuristic prophecy or paradigm, and that it matters to us today. So I hope I've explained this fairly well in the text. And so let's go back to the chart real quick. We'll finish this up and hopefully get to the end of this video, because I know it's been almost 3 hours at this point. So if we go back to the chart and we take the paradigm that I just walked through, all these dates, and you start to plug them in from the locus event of Joel 1 all the way to the end, the Feast of Tabernacles, you'll see that all these dates fit in perfectly with the 1260 days, the 1290 days, the 1335 days, and the 2300 days, which I indicate I believe will start on June 30th, which is 10 days from today. Will this culminate into this event sequence? I don't know. I'm telling you that these timestamps are here for a reason. I had originally started with Psalm 90 and a few things on the outer perimeter here on these dates, and then all these additional paradigms filled in all these gaps perfectly. So is this what's coming? Is this a time stamp, a flow chart, a time to the end? Do these dates matter? We will know before long. I do believe that Enoch's prophecy of the 70 shepherds is right and active still. People are using the prime ministers to debunk this, and they're not using the leaders of this country. They're using a Speaker of the House, as we would have in the United States here, and using them as the actual president or leader is not what I think Enoch was talking about. And so if Isaac Herzog is the 11th president and is captured and taken out of commission for up to 3 years, and then a regional leader is implemented over here and then killed, that would fulfill the 12th king, which would then bring back our King, Jesus, on the 7th trumpet during the Feast of Trumpets right after that. on October 2nd and 3rd of 2027. I say it's October 2nd because it has to be between the 15 days of God's wrath between the 2nd and the 17th. It's going to be a rough 6.5 years, guys. Get ready for this. We are starting to see an acceleration. I'm having acceleration dreams. I had some really intense dreams the other night of acceleration. And I believe the 3 supermoons with the blood moon in between, in the middle, is an omen that we are now moving into Jacob's trouble. June 30th is coming, and we are now going to start the procession of the 2300 days of Daniel 8:13 through 14. God bless everybody. Keep the faith. Find the open door. Find Jesus. He's the only way to heaven. He's the only way to the Father. You are going to be here on the ground. If you are being pre-raptured before the seals, or you think you're not going to be here for that, you shouldn't be here already because you should have been gone here. Okay? That's what you're telling me, that you're not going to go through any of this. No seals, no nothing. That we're all special people. Well, if God's going to force His people, the Jews, to be destroyed, 2/3 of them by sword and plague, I have a hard time understanding how you think you're special and you're going to get a golden Wonka ticket to free access to heaven. I want to see you explain that one to the Creator Himself, because the books of life will open and you will have to explain why you didn't put oil in your lamp, and you believe these false teachers that have taught you for years that you are so special that you do not have to go through any kind of tribulation to make it to the end, is absurd. So find the open door. Get yourself ready, because the next 6.5 years is going to be a nightmare on the ground. It tells us that this is the worst time in history, that all culmination of all events prior and past will not even resemble what we're working into. God bless. Have a great night.